The Japanese soldier crouched in the dense jungle undergrowth of Peleliu believed firepower came from disciplined spirit and the cold steel of a bayonet fixed to his Type 99 Arisaka. The American Marine advancing through the same volcanic ridgeline knew differently. He carried an M1 Garand that could unleash 8 rounds of .30-06 Springfield ammunition as fast as his trigger finger could move, no bolt manipulation required, no pause for the enemy to exploit. 2 rifles. 2 philosophies. One would define survival in the brutal close-quarters warfare of the Pacific Islands, and the other would condemn thousands of soldiers to die clutching weapons that belonged to an earlier age of warfare. Before we go deeper into how this decision changed the Pacific War forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. The paradox begins not with the rifles themselves, but with the doctrines that birthed them. By 1941, when the Empire of Japan plunged into total war across the Pacific, its infantry carried weapons that represented a philosophy forged during the Meiji Restoration and tempered in the crucible of the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. Japanese military theorists of that era had witnessed how disciplined infantry, advancing with fixed bayonets and unwavering morale, could break numerically superior Russian forces at places like Port Arthur and Mukden. They concluded that Saishin, the warrior spirit cultivated through relentless training and absolute devotion to the emperor, constituted the decisive factor in modern combat. Rifles served primarily as platforms for the bayonet, the true instrument of the Imperial Japanese Army's offensive doctrine. Marksmanship training emphasized rapid bolt manipulation and the ability to close with the enemy for hand-to-hand combat. Japanese recruits spent countless hours practicing jukendo, the martial art of bayonet fighting derived from traditional spear techniques. They learned to see their Arisaka rifles not as instruments of long-range fire superiority but as extensions of their warrior spirit, tools for delivering death at arm's length where courage and determination would overcome any material advantage. This philosophy manifested in the Type 38 Arisaka rifle, adopted in 1905 and named after the 38th year of Emperor Meiji's reign. Chambered in 6.5 by 50 mm Arisaka, it fired a relatively light bullet at approximately 2,500 feet per second. The round produced minimal recoil, allowing even smaller-statured Japanese soldiers to maintain accuracy during rapid bolt-action fire. At 50.4 inches in overall length with a 31.4 inch barrel, the Type 38 stood as the longest standard infantry rifle of World War II. This excessive length served a deliberate purpose. With a Type 30 bayonet affixed, measuring an additional 15.75 inches, the entire assembly stretched to over 66 inches, providing substantial reach advantage in close combat. Japanese doctrine prioritized this capability above all others. Over 3 million Type 38 rifles rolled off production lines at arsenals in Tokyo, Kokura, Nagoya, and occupied territories like Mukden in Manchuria and Jinsen in Korea. By the time Japan developed the Type 99 rifle in 1939, shortening the overall length to 44 inches and upgrading the caliber to 7.7 by 58 mm Arisaka for greater stopping power, the fundamental philosophy remained unchanged. These rifles existed to bring Japanese infantry within bayonet range, where superior spirit would decide the outcome. Meanwhile, halfway around the world in Springfield, Massachusetts, a French-Canadian immigrant named Jean Cantius Garand pursued an entirely different vision. Born in Quebec in 1888, Garand had arrived in the United States as a child and demonstrated early genius for mechanical innovation. By 1919, he had secured employment at Springfield Army, the United States Army's principal firearms development facility, where he began work on a project that would consume the next 2 decades of his life. The challenge seemed straightforward on paper but proved devilishly complex in execution. Design a semi-automatic rifle that could withstand battlefield abuse, function reliably under extreme conditions, maintain accuracy comparable to bolt-action weapons, and be manufactured at scale. Previous attempts at semi-automatic military rifles had foundered on mechanical complexity, excessive weight, or catastrophic reliability failures. The French Fusil automatique Model 1917 jammed constantly. The Mexican Mondragon rifle required meticulous cleaning after minimal use. The U.S. Army's own experiments with the M1918 Browning automatic rifle as a standard infantry weapon proved the gun too heavy and ammunition-hungry for individual riflemen. Garand approached the problem with characteristic methodical patience, dedicating every waking hour to solving what had defeated other designers. He arrived at Springfield Armory each morning before dawn, often staying late into the night, consumed by the challenge of creating a reliable semi-automatic rifle. His early prototypes experimented with different gas systems, primer actuation mechanisms, and various calibers, including the .276 Pedersen round that nearly became the M1's chambering. Through the 1920s, Garand built and tested over 20 distinct prototypes, each incorporating lessons from the failures of previous designs. He spent countless hours at the range, personally firing thousands of rounds through each variation, meticulously recording failures and successes in notebooks that filled cabinet drawers. By 1928, he had settled on a gas-operated system that tapped propellant gases from a port drilled in the barrel approximately 6 inches from the muzzle. These gases drove a piston connected to an operating rod that cycled the action through a rotating bolt mechanism. His design utilized a gas-operated system in which propellant gases from the fired cartridge drove a piston that cycled the action, extracting the spent casing, cocking the hammer, and chambering a fresh round from an 8-round EN block clip. The genius lay in the simplicity. Unlike competing designs that employed complex locking mechanisms prone to fouling, Garand's rotating bolt featured a simple cam path that locked and unlocked with mechanical reliability. The rifle's operating rod extended beneath the barrel, protected from the elements, driven by gas tapped from a port 6 inches from the muzzle. This positioning provided sufficient gas pressure for reliable cycling while avoiding the excessive fouling that plagued earlier gas-operated designs. By 1932, Garand had filed patents for his semi-automatic, caliber .30 M1 rifle. Testing continued through the mid-1930s, with thousands of rounds fired under conditions designed to break the weapon. Testers buried rifles in sand, submerged them in water, froze them, baked them, and fired them until barrels glowed red. The M1 Garand survived. Army testing board subjected Garand's prototypes to torture that would have destroyed lesser weapons. They fired rifles submerged in water, caked with mud, frozen in Arctic conditions, and baked in desert heat. They dropped rifles from heights, dragged them behind vehicles, and deliberately damaged components to test field repair capabilities. One particularly grueling test involved firing 6,000 rounds through a single rifle without cleaning, a procedure that caused competing designs to jam fatally within the first 1,000 rounds. Garand's rifle completed all 6,000 rounds with only minor stoppages easily cleared in seconds. Another test buried rifles in sand for days before extraction and immediate firing. The M1 Garand passed. Competing designs failed. By 1932, the Army was convinced Garand had solved the semi-automatic rifle challenge. However, budget constraints during the Great Depression and debate over caliber selection delayed official adoption for 5 more years. Some ordnance officers argued the rifle should be chambered in the experimental .276 Pedersen round, which offered reduced recoil and allowed soldiers to carry more ammunition. General Douglas MacArthur, then Army Chief of Staff, overruled this proposal, insisting the rifle chamber the existing .30-06 Springfield cartridge to avoid the logistical nightmare of introducing new ammunition while warehouses held millions of existing rounds. Garand redesigned his rifle around the .30-06 cartridge, strengthening the receiver and operating rod to handle the more powerful round. On July 21, 1937, Springfield Army produced its first official M1 Garand for military service. The rifle weighed 9.5 pounds empty, 11.25 pounds loaded with 8.30-06 Springfield cartridges. Its 24-inch barrel featured 4-groove rifling that imparted stabilizing spin to bullets exiting at 2,800 feet per second. Effective range reached 500 yards for aimed fire, though experienced marksmen regularly engaged targets beyond 600 yards. The gas system cycled reliably between temperatures of -40 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees, critical for global deployment from Arctic to tropical environments. The United States Army, recognizing the revolutionary potential, ordered immediate full-scale production. By 1940, Springfield Army had manufactured approximately 50,000 M1 rifles. Winchester Repeating Arms received contracts to supplement production. International Harvester and Harrington and Richardson eventually joined the manufacturing effort. But in 1940, when the United States Marine Corps finally authorized the M1 Garand to replace its inventory of M1903 Springfield bolt-action rifles, production capacity could not meet demand. The Marines would enter the Pacific War carrying a mixture of old and new, bolt-action and semi-automatic, with consequences that would shape every island battle from Guadalcanal forward. Marine Corps training procedures adapted quickly to the M1 Garand once sufficient quantities became available in 1943. Recruit training at locations like Camp Pendleton in California and Parris Island in South Carolina incorporated extensive rifle qualification courses that differed substantially from previous bolt-action training. Marines learned to load the EN block clip with a distinctive motion, pressing it downward into the receiver with the heel of the palm while the thumb pushed the top cartridge, feeling for the metallic click that indicated proper seating. Instructors drilled recruits on the importance of keeping thumbs clear during loading to avoid M1 thumb, a painful injury that occurred when the bolt slammed forward on an improperly positioned digit. Marines practiced rapid magazine changes, drawing fresh clips from canvas bandoliers worn across the chest, loading under stress, and maintaining fire discipline to avoid exhausting ammunition during sustained firefights. Marksmanship qualification required recruits to engage targets at ranges from 200 to 500 yards in prone, sitting, kneeling, and standing positions. They learned sight adjustment procedures, compensating for windage and elevation using the rifle's precision rear aperture sight. The qualification course demanded accuracy under time pressure, with recruits firing from various positions while instructors called target exposures. Those who qualified as expert demonstrated consistent hits on man-sized targets at 500 yards, a testament to both the M1's inherent accuracy and the Marine Corps' rigorous training standards. By the time Marines boarded transports bound for Pacific combat zones, they could field strip and reassemble their M1 Garands blindfolded, clear jams instantly through muscle memory, and maintain effective fire under conditions that would paralyze untrained soldiers. This combination of superior weapon and superior training created infantry forces that Japanese commanders learned to fear and respect. August 7, 1942. The 1st Marine Division stormed ashore at Guadalcanal, launching America's first major ground offensive of the Pacific War. The Marines carried M1903 Springfield rifles, 5-round bolt-action weapons that had served since 1903. These were reliable, accurate firearms, but they belonged to a previous generation of warfare. Each shot required the Marine to work the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a fresh round, and reacquiring the target through iron sights. A trained rifleman could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute under ideal conditions. Combat conditions were never ideal. Japanese forces defending Guadalcanal discovered this fundamental limitation and exploited it ruthlessly during night infiltration attacks and close-range banzai charges. When Japanese infantry burst from jungle concealment at distances measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards, Marines with bolt-action rifles faced a simple mathematical problem. One shot every 4 seconds against enemies closing at sprinting speed left minimal margin for error. Miss the first shot and you might not get a second before the enemy reached bayonet range. Word spread quickly among the Marine regiments about Army units arriving on Guadalcanal equipped with M1 Garands. These soldiers could fire as rapidly as they pulled the trigger. No bolt manipulation interrupted their fire. They maintained sight picture throughout, tracking targets without the mechanical pause that invited enemy advance. Marines who witnessed M1-equipped soldiers in combat began demanding the same weapon. They had seen the future of infantry firepower, and it made their M1903 Springfields feel like muskets by comparison. The scuttlebutt became irresistible. Get your hands on a Garand if you want to survive the next island. Trade for one. Scrounge one from casualties. Request one through official channels. Just get one before the next amphibious assault. The Marine Corps Commandant authorized full transition to the M1 Garand on June 26, 1942, but authorization and availability represented different realities. The 1st Marine Division did not receive substantial M1 allotments until after Guadalcanal ended in February 1943. The newly formed 3rd Marine Division received M1s during stateside training in fall 1942 before deploying to the Pacific. By late 1943, sufficient production capacity existed to equip all frontline Marine infantry units with M1 Garands. The transformation in combat capability proved immediate and decisive. An 8-man Marine rifle squad, each member carrying an M1 Garand with 8-round capacity, could deliver 64 rounds of semi-automatic fire before anyone needed to reload. That same squad, armed with M1903 bolt-action rifles, each holding 5 rounds, delivered just 40 rounds of slower, manually cycled fire. The difference exceeded mere numbers. It represented a qualitative shift in small unit tactics. Marines advancing through jungle terrain could now maintain suppressive fire while maneuvering. When Japanese defenders opened fire from concealed positions, Marines could respond instantly with volume of fire that pinned enemies in place, buying critical seconds for flanking movements. The M1 semi-automatic capability allowed individual Marines to engage multiple targets in rapid succession without losing sight picture or combat focus. Muscle memory developed quickly. Load clip. Feel the bolt slam forward. Acquire target. Fire. 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 The rhythm became instinctive. The rifle cycled so smoothly that experienced Marines learned to fire, absorb recoil, reacquire target, and fire again in less than a second. This speed forced Japanese tactics into crisis. Doctrine based on rushing American positions during bolt manipulation pauses suddenly encountered uninterrupted streams of .30-06 ammunition. Barnseye charges that had succeeded against bolt-action rifles met withering fire that dropped attackers before they closed range. Night infiltration tactics that exploited the time required for Marines to work rifle bolts and chamber fresh rounds failed against continuous semi-automatic fire. The battles for Tarawa in November 1943 demonstrated the M1's value under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The 2nd Marine Division assaulted Bishio Island, a coral atoll fortified with bunkers, pillboxes, and thousands of fanatical Japanese defenders. Landing craft grounded on coral reefs hundreds of yards from shore, forcing Marines to wade through chest-deep water while under machine gun and artillery fire. Those who reached the beach found themselves pinned against a seawall with Japanese positions just yards away. Close-quarters combat erupted in dimensions measured in feet. Marines with M1 Garands could fire continuously while advancing, suppressing Japanese firing ports, engaging defenders who emerged from bunkers. The Arisaka-equipped Japanese, despite fighting from prepared positions with ammunition stockpiled for sustained defense, discovered their bolt-action rifles could not generate sufficient volume of fire to stop Marines who kept shooting while moving. The tactical equation had inverted. Attackers now possessed firepower superiority over defenders. This violated every principle of conventional military wisdom, but semi-automatic rifles made it reality. Peleliu in September 1944 further proved the pattern. The 1st Marine Division, now completely equipped with M1 Garands, assaulted another fortified island where Japanese defenders had prepared elaborate cave systems in coral limestone ridges. The terrain channeled combat into narrow ravines and cave mouths where firefights occurred at distances where soldiers could have thrown rocks at each other. Japanese defenders employed Type 99 Arisaka rifles, the updated 7.7mm version designed to deliver greater stopping power than the earlier 6.5mm Type 38. On paper, the Type 99 represented a modern weapon. In practice, it remained a bolt-action rifle requiring manual operation between shots. Marines with M1 Garands dominated these close-range engagements through sheer volume of fire. When a Marine spotted movement near a cave entrance, he could put multiple rounds into that position before a Japanese defender with an Arisaka could work his bolt for a second shot. The cumulative effect psychologically devastated Japanese infantry who had trained their entire military careers believing superior spirit and bayonet prowess would overcome any material disadvantage. They discovered that spirit could not deflect bullets, and bayonets could not reach enemies who shot them down at 50 yards while maintaining uninterrupted fire. The engineering principles underlying this dominance warrant examination because they reveal why the M1 succeeded where other semi-automatic designs failed. The rifle's gas operating system tapped propellant gases through a port drilled in the barrel 6 inches from the muzzle. These gases entered a cylinder containing a piston connected to the operating rod. Gas pressure drove the piston rearward, cycling the action. As the operating rod moved back, cum surfaces rotated the bolt, unlocking it from the receiver. Continued rearward movement extracted the spent cartridge case and cocked the hammer. A spring then drove the operating rod forward, stripping a fresh round from the EN block clip and chambering it while rotating surfaces locked the bolt. The entire cycle required approximately 1/10 of a second. The system operated in a completely enclosed mechanism protected from mud, sand, and salt water. Marines could immerse M1 Garands in Pacific surf, shake out the water, and fire immediately. Japanese Arisaka rifles, being manually operated, functioned equally well after submersion, but that parity meant nothing when the Japanese soldier could fire once while the Marine fired 8 times. The ballistic performance of the .30-06 Springfield cartridge deserves detailed examination because it represented the culmination of decades of American ammunition development. Adopted in 1906, the cartridge originally fired a 150-grain round-nose bullet at approximately 2,700 feet per second. By World War I, the Army had transitioned to a 174-grain boat-tail Spitzer bullet designated M1 ball ammunition, which offered improved ballistic coefficient and better long-range performance. World War I-era M2 ball ammunition, standardized in 1940, returned to a 150-grain flat-base bullet but with optimized powder charge that produced 2,800 feet per second muzzle velocity from the M1 Garand's 24-inch barrel. This combination delivered 2,820 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, sufficient to penetrate steel helmets at 500 yards and retain lethal energy beyond 1,000 yards. The bullet's trajectory remained relatively flat to 300 yards, with only 2.9 inches of drop at 200 yards when zeroed at 100 yards, allowing Marines to engage targets at typical jungle combat ranges without holdover adjustments. The cartridge's substantial powder charge created considerable muzzle blast and recoil, approximately 17 foot-pounds of free recoil energy, but the M1's 9.5-pound weight and well-designed stock geometry absorbed this recoil effectively, allowing experienced shooters to maintain sight picture through the recoil cycle and immediately reacquire targets. The .30-06 cartridge's brass cases measured 2.49 inches in length with a rim diameter of .473 inches, and the overall loaded cartridge length of 3.340 inches permitted reliable feeding from the EN block clip through the M1's action. American ammunition production during the war exceeded 40 billion rounds across all calibers, with .30-06 representing a substantial percentage. Quality control remained remarkably consistent throughout the war, with ammunition lots tested for velocity consistency, pressure levels, and accuracy. Marines could trust that cartridges would perform identically whether manufactured in 1942 or 1945, a reliability that Japanese forces, suffering from deteriorating quality control and powder substitutions, could not match by war's end. The ammunition itself contributed to American superiority. The .30-06 Springfield cartridge fired a 150-grain bullet at 2,800 feet per second, delivering 2,820 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. This proved substantially more powerful than the 6.5 by 50 mm Arisaka round from Type 38 rifles, which generated approximately 1,966 foot-pounds with a 139-grain bullet at 2,500 feet per second. Even the upgraded 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge in Type 99 rifles, firing a 180-grain bullet at roughly 2,400 feet per second, produced only about 2,300 foot-pounds of energy. The .30-06 hit harder, penetrated deeper, and delivered more consistent terminal performance. In jungle combat where targets appeared suddenly at close range, often partially concealed by vegetation, the ability to punch through palm fronds and bamboo while retaining lethal energy made tangible difference. Marines learned they could engage targets through light cover with reasonable confidence of hits. Japanese infantry with less powerful cartridges frequently saw their rounds deflected or slowed by intervening foliage. Terminal ballistics in Pacific jungle combat conditions revealed the .30-06 cartridge's substantial advantages over Japanese rounds. The 150-grain M2 ball bullet, constructed with a gilding metal jacket over a lead antimony core, maintained structural integrity through light cover such as palm fronds, bamboo, and wooden structures that commonly concealed combatants in jungle terrain. Penetration tests conducted after the war demonstrated the .30-06 could punch through 3 inches of hardwood at 200 yards while retaining sufficient energy for lethal wounds. The Japanese 6.5 by 50 mm Arisaka round, while exceptionally accurate and generating minimal recoil, produced only 1,966 foot-pounds of muzzle energy with its 139-grain bullet traveling at 2,500 feet per second. This lighter bullet frequently deflected when encountering foliage, and its reduced sectional density meant it surrendered energy more rapidly in tissue. Even the upgraded 7.7 by 58 mm cartridge used in Type 99 rifles, firing a 180-grain bullet at approximately 2,400 feet per second for about 2,300 foot-pounds of energy, remained noticeably less powerful than the .30-06. Marines reported incidents where their rounds passed completely through Japanese soldiers and struck enemies behind them, a phenomenon called overpenetration that indicated excessive energy but demonstrated the cartridge's terminal effectiveness. Japanese soldiers, by contrast, rarely achieved similar penetration with either the 6.5 mm or 7.7 mm cartridges. The .30-06 larger diameter bullet, measuring 0.308 inches versus the 6.5 mm's 0.264 inches, created wider wound channels and greater tissue disruption, translating into faster incapacitation of targets. This mattered immensely in close-quarters combat where split-second differences between wounding and instantly incapacitating an attacker meant survival or death. The hydraulic shock generated by the .30-06 impact often dropped enemies immediately even with non-central nervous system hits, while Japanese rounds occasionally required multiple hits to achieve similar results. These ballistic realities, combined with the M1 semi-automatic capability, created a lethality gap that doctrine and training could not bridge. But raw power represented only part of the equation. The M1's 8-round EN block clip loaded from the top of the action with a distinctive metallic clang as the bolt slammed forward. This loading method proved faster than the 5-round stripper clips used with M1903 Springfields or Arisaka rifles. A Marine could reload an M1 in approximately 2 seconds with practiced hands. The shooter pressed the clip downward into the internal magazine, and a spring-loaded follower retained the rounds. When the 8th and final round chambered and fired, the empty clip ejected automatically with a metallic ping that became iconic. Myths later circulated that this sound warned Japanese soldiers when Marines' rifles were empty, allowing them to rush positions during reloading. Combat veterans dismissed this notion as nonsense. In the chaos of firefights with explosions, automatic weapons fire, shouted commands, and screaming wounded, a single metallic ping was inaudible beyond a few yards. Moreover, Marines rarely fired entire clips simultaneously. Tactical doctrine emphasized fire discipline and mutual support. While one Marine reloaded, his squad mates maintained fire. The 2-second reload interval provided insufficient time for Japanese infantry to exploit even if they somehow heard the sound and correctly identified its meaning amidst combat noise. The logistics of ammunition supply in the Pacific Theater revealed another dimension of American advantages. Marines landing on hostile beaches carried 80 to 120 rounds of .30-06 ammunition in 10 8-round clips distributed across their canvas cartridge belts and bandoliers. Additional ammunition arrived in wooden crates and waterproof metal containers that could be opened quickly to resupply depleted units. American logistics doctrine emphasized maintaining sufficient ammunition stockpiles at forward positions to sustain intensive combat operations. Supply ships, landing craft, and later cargo aircraft delivered millions of rounds to advance bases, ensuring Marines never fought wondering if ammunition would arrive. This logistical supremacy meant Marines could fire aggressively, knowing resupply would follow. Japanese forces, by contrast, suffered chronic ammunition shortages that worsened as American submarines decimated supply convoys and strategic bombing destroyed arsenals. Japanese soldiers in the Pacific's latter campaigns often received orders limiting rifle ammunition to specific daily allowances, sometimes as few as 30 rounds per soldier per day. This forced Japanese infantry into defensive postures that conserved ammunition but surrendered initiative to better supplied American forces. Japanese Arisaka rifles loaded via 5-round stripper clips inserted into the internal magazine from the top, pressing rounds down against spring pressure before removing the clip. The process required perhaps 3 to 4 seconds for a trained soldier under ideal conditions. In combat, with adrenaline surging and fine motor skills degraded, it took longer. The Japanese soldier also had to manually work the bolt after each shot, interrupting his sight picture, requiring him to reacquire the target, extending the time between successive shots. A Marine with an M1 Garand maintained his cheek weld, kept his eyes on target, and simply pressed the trigger repeatedly. The mechanical advantage compounded across firefights. In a 30-second engagement, a Marine could fire 15 to 20 aimed shots. A Japanese soldier might manage 6 to 8. Multiply this across a squad or platoon, and the differential became overwhelming. The M1's reliability under field conditions bordered on legendary. The rifle functioned in temperatures from Arctic cold to tropical heat, in driving rain, caked with coral dust, or filmed with saltwater spray. Marines subjected their Garands to abuse that would have destroyed lesser weapons. They used them as pry bars, hammers, and paddles. They slept with them in foxholes that filled with rainwater. They humped them through fetid jungles where humidity condensed on every metal surface. The M1 absorbed this punishment and continued functioning. When problems did occur, they typically stemmed from worn springs or carbon buildup in the gas system, issues a unit armorer could address in minutes with basic tools. Field stripping required no special implements. A Marine could disassemble his M1 to key components in under a minute, clean the gas system, and reassemble it in the dark by feel alone. This mechanical simplicity translated into operational readiness rates that kept Marines armed when they needed firepower most. Japanese ammunition production faced challenges that American industry never encountered. Early war Japanese cartridge manufacturing maintained excellent standards, with consistent powder charges, properly annealed brass cases, and quality-controlled bullets. Ammunition produced at the Kokura and Tokyo arsenals through 1942 performed reliably with minimal variation. However, as the war progressed and American forces captured or isolated raw material sources, Japanese ammunition quality declined noticeably. Copper shortages forced substitution of lower-grade brass alloys for cartridge cases, leading to increased case failures and extraction problems. Powder quality suffered as chemical precursors became scarce, producing ammunition with inconsistent velocities and occasional hangfires where cartridges fired several seconds after the firing pin struck. Japanese soldiers in the final year of the war reported ammunition that sometimes failed to fire at all, requiring them to work their bolt several times attempting to ignite stubborn primers. Bullet construction also deteriorated, with some late-war ammunition using mild steel jackets instead of copper, which accelerated barrel erosion and reduced accuracy. These quality problems compounded the tactical disadvantages Japanese infantry already faced. A rifle that fires once per bolt manipulation becomes nearly useless when ammunition malfunctions frequently. Marines with M1 Garands, supplied with consistent American-manufactured ammunition, could trust every round would fire immediately with predictable velocity and accuracy. This reliability differential widened the performance gap beyond what mechanical differences alone would predict. Arisaka rifles similarly earned reputations for ruggedness and reliability. Japanese arsenals built them to exacting standards through the mid-war period. The action cycled smoothly. The rifles shrugged off abuse. But quality control deteriorated as the war progressed and American bombing campaigns disrupted industrial production. By 1944 and 1945, Japanese factories produced what collectors later termed last-ditch Arisaka rifles with crude machining, simplified stocks without finish, and elimination of features like anti-aircraft sights and monopods that earlier models included. Some late-war Type 99 rifles featured such poor quality that the Imperial Chrysanthemum stamp, normally ground off captured rifles by defeated Japanese forces as a final act of loyalty to the Emperor, remained intact because soldiers knew these weapons disgraced the Emperor's symbol. These rifles still functioned, but fit and finish declined noticeably. Triggers grew rougher. Wood stocks arrived unfinished or poorly fitted. Even well-made Arisaka rifles could not overcome the fundamental limitation of bolt-action design against semi-automatic opponents who shot 8 times in the span Japanese infantry shot twice. The doctrine gap widened this mechanical advantage into a chasm. Japanese military training emphasized spirit, endurance, and bayonet proficiency. Recruits spent countless hours practicing charges with fixed bayonets, learning jukendo techniques derived from ancient spear fighting traditions. They drilled on night infiltration, moving silently through terrain to assault enemy positions in close combat where Japanese belief in superior warrior spirit would prevail. This training philosophy made perfect sense against opponents armed with bolt-action rifles. Closing to bayonet range negated any firepower advantage because all soldiers, regardless of nationality, could only thrust and parry once the rifle became a spear. But Japanese doctrine failed to adapt when confronted with American semi-automatic rifles that extended the lethal firepower zone from hundreds of yards down to arm's length. Marines could maintain effective fire at ranges where Japanese soldiers expected to dominate through close-quarters ferocity. Banzai charges that might have succeeded against bolt-action-equipped colonial forces in China or Southeast Asia met American M1 fire that dropped attackers in waves before they covered half the distance to Marine positions. The largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War demonstrated this mismatch in horrifying detail. On the night of July 6 to 7, 1944, on Saipan, Japanese General Yoshitsugu Saito ordered a final mass attack against American positions held primarily by Army troops of the 27th Infantry Division and elements of the 2nd Marine Division. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers, many armed with Arisaka rifles and fixed bayonets, charged in waves against entrenched American machine gun and rifle positions. The assault achieved initial success through sheer mass, overrunning some positions through numerical advantage. But Marines and soldiers with M1 Garands poured fire into the human waves with devastating effect. They shot until barrels overheated, then grabbed fresh rifles from casualties and kept shooting. The semi-automatic capability allowed individual Marines to engage multiple attackers without the pause that bolt-action rifles required. By dawn, over 4,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead. American casualties, while significant, totaled under 1,000. The mathematics of firepower had resolved the equation brutally. Japanese spirit and bayonet training could not overcome American semi-automatic rifles that fired continuously until every attacker fell. Individual Marine accounts from Pacific battles consistently emphasized the M1's life-saving capability. They spoke of firefights where Japanese soldiers burst from jungle concealment at 20 yards, running at full sprint with bayonets leveled. With bolt-action rifles, Marines might get one shot before impact forced hand-to-hand combat. With M1 Garands, they could engage immediately and fire repeatedly until the threat ended. This psychological confidence manifested in more aggressive tactics. Marines advanced through dangerous terrain knowing their rifles could respond instantly to threats. They patrolled with greater boldness because contact with the enemy did not mean fumbling with a bolt while under fire. The weapon became extension of intent. See target. Shoot target. Engage next target. The simplicity of operation under stress saved lives measured in thousands across the island-hopping campaign. The contrast appeared starkest during close-range urban combat or cave fighting where distances collapsed to room-clearing ranges. On Okinawa in April through June 1945, Marines fought for every yard through fortified positions, tombs, and cave systems where Japanese defenders waited with Arisaka rifles. In these confined spaces, the advantage of semi-automatic fire compounded exponentially. A Marine entering a cave or structure could sweep his sector, firing at any movement without breaking stride or manipulating his weapon's action. The speed of engagement measured in fractions of seconds. Japanese defenders, despite fighting from prepared positions with intimate terrain knowledge, found themselves outgunned by attackers who never stopped shooting. The tactical inversion was complete. Offense now held firepower advantage over defense, attacking Marines possessed greater sustained fire than entrenched Japanese infantry, and American doctrine could emphasize aggressive assault because the M1 Garand enabled tactics that would have been suicidal with bolt-action rifles. Production numbers tell the story of American industrial mobilization that made this advantage possible. Springfield Armory manufactured 4,188,669 M1 Garand rifles between 1937 and 1957. Winchester Repeating Arms produced 513,880 rifles during wartime contracts. International Harvester, better known for farm equipment, tooled up factories to build 337,623 M1 rifles. Harrington and Richardson contributed 428,600 rifles. By war's end in August 1945, American factories had delivered over 5.4 million M1 Garand rifles. This industrial capacity dwarfed Japanese production. Exact figures for Arisaka rifle production remain disputed because records were destroyed, but estimates suggest approximately 3.5 million Type 38 rifles and 3.5 million Type 99 rifles were manufactured across all arsenals from 1905 through 1945. Japan produced substantial numbers, but quality declined as American strategic bombing destroyed factories and raw material shortages forced substitutions in metallurgy and manufacturing processes. American production, by contrast, maintained consistent quality throughout the war while accelerating output. By 1943, Springfield Armory alone produced over 60,000 M1 rifles monthly. The weapons arrived at Pacific bases by the tens of thousands, ensuring every Marine in a rifle squad carried an M1 by mid-1944. The M1's maintenance requirements proved manageable even under field conditions that destroyed more delicate equipment. The rifle required regular cleaning of the gas system to prevent carbon buildup that could slow cycling. Marines learned to field strip the gas cylinder and operating rod, scrub components clean, apply light oil, and reassemble. The process took 5 minutes. Bore cleaning followed the same procedures as any rifle. Swab the barrel, clean the chamber, inspect for pitting or erosion. The EN block clip system occasionally jammed if clips were damaged or bent, but Marines quickly learned to inspect clips before loading and discard any with visible deformation. Springs eventually weakened after thousands of rounds, particularly the operating rod spring, but unit armorers carried spares and could replace them in minutes. The M1's design simplicity meant that catastrophic failures requiring depot-level repair occurred rarely. Battle damage represented the primary reason rifles left service. Bullet impacts could damage receivers, barrels, or operating rods beyond field repair. But absent such damage, M1 rifles served reliably through entire campaigns with only basic preventive maintenance. Japanese Arisaka rifles, being simpler mechanically, required even less maintenance. Bolt-action designs have fewer moving parts to clean or replace. Japanese soldiers could maintain their Arisaka rifles with minimal tools and supplies. But mechanical simplicity could not compensate for doctrinal rigidity and the fundamental limitation of manual operation between shots. Japanese tactical manuals, captured and translated by American intelligence, revealed an army that understood modern warfare's principles but remained wedded to offensive spirit and close combat that industrial-age firepower had rendered obsolete. Instructions emphasized aggressive advance, nighttime infiltration, and bayonet assault. Marksmanship training stressed rapid bolt manipulation and ability to fire while advancing. These were valuable skills, but they presumed the enemy likewise manipulated bolts and paused between shots. American Marines with M1 Garands did not pause. They fired continuously until targets stopped threatening. The question arises why Japan did not develop semi-automatic rifles earlier or in greater numbers. The answer lies partially in resources and partially in doctrine. Japan's industrial capacity, stretched across naval construction, aircraft production, and mechanized warfare, could not support the additional machining and metallurgy required for mass-produced semi-automatic rifles. The M1 Garand required more manufacturing steps, tighter tolerances, and higher-grade steel than bolt-action rifles. Japanese industry, even before American strategic bombing devastated factories, operated near capacity producing existing weapon systems. Developing, testing, and fielding a semi-automatic rifle would have demanded resources diverted from other programs. More fundamentally, Japanese doctrine did not prioritize individual firepower. The philosophy emphasizing spirit and bayonet prowess viewed rifles primarily as bayonet platforms. Increased rate of fire seemed less valuable than cultivating warrior mentality and physical courage. This doctrinal calculus proved catastrophically wrong in combat against American Marines who combined warrior mentality with overwhelming firepower advantage. Japan did attempt limited semi-automatic rifle development. Near war's end, desperate to counter American firepower superiority, Japanese engineers copied captured M1 Garands, producing a tiny number of Type 4 and Type 5 rifles. These weapons featured gas-operated actions clearly derived from the M1's design but chambered in Japanese 7.7mm ammunition. Production never exceeded a few hundred rifles because American bombing campaigns had destroyed the factory infrastructure required for mass production. The effort represented too little, too late. By 1945, Japan's industrial capacity barely maintained production of conventional weapons. Introducing complex semi-automatic rifles into an arsenal already suffering catastrophic shortages of basic ammunition and spare parts was impossible. Japanese infantry in the war's final battles continued carrying Arisaka bolt-action rifles, many of crude manufacture and declining quality, against American Marines whose M1 Garands maintained consistent excellence. The human cost of this firepower disparity can never be precisely calculated, but combat loss ratios suggest its magnitude. American forces generally suffered lower casualties than Japanese forces in Pacific battles despite conducting offensive operations against prepared defenses, a situation that conventionally favors the defender. The firepower advantage of semi-automatic rifles certainly contributed to this inversion of expected casualty ratios. Marines could advance while maintaining suppressive fire. They could respond instantly to contact without manipulating weapon actions. They could engage multiple targets in rapid succession. These capabilities translated into Japanese casualties and Marine survival. Exact attribution remains impossible because combat outcomes depend on countless variables including tactics, terrain, artillery support, air power, and individual leadership. But Marines themselves believed absolutely that the M1 Garand saved their lives, and their belief rested on combat experience that demonstrated the rifle's superiority in firefights measured in seconds where speed of fire meant life or death. General George S. Patton famously called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised, a quote that became legendary despite Patton's tendency toward hyperbole. In the context of the Pacific War, where individual riflemen fought at closer ranges than European theater battles and where Japanese tactics emphasized close assault, Patton's assessment appears less hyperbolic. The M1 Garand gave American infantry a decisive advantage in the specific combat conditions of island warfare. Marines advancing across open beaches, through dense jungle, into fortified cave systems, or through the rubble of destroyed towns could rely on their rifles to fire continuously without interruption. This reliability under the most extreme conditions imaginable, combined with semi-automatic operation that doubled or tripled effective rate of fire compared to bolt-action rifles, created tactical advantages that shaped every Pacific battle from Tarawa through Okinawa. The Japanese preference for bolt-action Arisaka rifles reflected neither technological ignorance nor industrial incapability. Early war Arisaka rifles exhibited excellent quality, reliable function, and adequate power for their intended purpose. The Type 38 in particular demonstrated remarkable accuracy and minimal recoil that facilitated rapid bolt manipulation. Skilled Japanese soldiers could operate their Arisakas with impressive speed. But even the fastest bolt-action manipulation could not match the speed of simply pulling a trigger 8 times. The fundamental physics and mechanics created an unbridgeable gap. Japanese doctrine, forged in earlier wars and reinforced through training that emphasized spiritual factors over material ones, failed to recognize this gap until combat revealed it in the most brutal terms possible. By then, Japan lacked the industrial capacity and resources to field semi-automatic rifles in numbers that might have narrowed the advantage. Japanese infantry continued advancing with Arisaka bolt-action rifles and fixed bayonets against American M1 Garands, and they continued dying in numbers that reflected the mechanical disparity. The Marines' preference for the M1 Garand over the Arisaka was never really a choice or preference. It was recognition of overwhelming superiority demonstrated in combat. The M1 fired faster, held more ammunition, required no manual operation between shots, and proved equally reliable under field conditions. These advantages rendered bolt-action rifles obsolete in infantry combat, not just Japanese Arisakas but also American M1903 Springfields, British Lee Enfields, and German Kar 98KS. The M1 represented the future. Bolt-action rifles belonged to the past. In the Pacific War's desperate island battles, Marines fought with future against Japanese infantry armed with past, and the outcome of individual firefights, squad actions, and entire campaigns reflected that chronological mismatch. The outdated M1 Garand succeeded because it was actually revolutionary. The modern Arisaka failed because it was actually obsolete the moment semi-automatic rifles entered service. The irony lies in perception versus reality. Outsiders viewing Japanese rifles in 1941 might have considered them modern weapons, well-made and effective. The Type 99 with its 7.7mm cartridge and folding monopod for prone firing positions appeared sophisticated. In contrast, the M1 Garand's 8-round EN block clip system seemed primitive compared to detachable box magazines used on some weapons. But sophistication of individual components mattered less than overall capability. The M1's EN block clip system proved faster and more reliable than many box magazine designs under combat conditions. The rifle's gas operating system functioned flawlessly in environments that rendered other semi-automatic weapons inoperable. The .30-06 cartridge hit harder and penetrated deeper than Japanese ammunition. Marines preferred the M1 not because of marketing or nationalism but because it kept them alive. That preference, born in combat and proven through 3 years of island warfare, constituted the ultimate validation. The legacy extends beyond World War II. The M1 Garand served American forces through the Korean War, remaining standard issue until replaced by the M14 in 1957. Many M14 design elements derived directly from the M1, representing evolutionary development rather than revolutionary replacement. The Garand's operating system influenced subsequent semi-automatic and automatic rifle designs worldwide. Its demonstration that semi-automatic rifles could achieve bolt-action accuracy while providing vastly superior firepower fundamentally transformed infantry tactics. Modern military forces worldwide issue semi-automatic or selective fire rifles to every infantryman. The universal adoption of these weapons traces lineage to John Garand's patient development work at Springfield Armory and the combat validation provided by Marines advancing across Pacific beaches with M1 rifles. The Arisaka bolt-action rifle, regardless of quality or craftsmanship, represented a dead-end technology. It served its purpose within Japanese doctrine, but that doctrine proved fatally flawed against American firepower and tactics. The human stories embedded in this mechanical comparison remind us that weapons technology alone never determines combat outcomes. Courage, training, leadership, logistics, and terrain all influence battle results. Japanese soldiers with Arisaka rifles fought with extraordinary bravery, often to the last man defending hopeless positions. Many preferred death to surrender, executing charges they knew would fail rather than accept defeat. This fanaticism created its own tactical challenge for Marines who could not assume Japanese soldiers would surrender or retreat when military logic dictated they should. But bravery and determination, however admirable in abstract sense, could not stop .30-06 bullets from M1 Garands fired by Marines who were equally brave and considerably better armed. The Pacific War proved that spirit and material factors both matter, but when material disparity reaches certain thresholds, spirit alone cannot bridge the gap. Japanese infantry discovered this truth in the most direct way possible, dying in the attempt to prove otherwise. For Marines who carried M1 Garands across the Pacific, the rifle became inseparable from survival. They learned its quirks and characteristics. They knew the sound it made when properly cleaned and lubricated versus when carbon buildup slowed the action. They understood how the weapon balanced, where to grip for rapid target acquisition, how much sight picture to hold for various ranges. The rifle's weight, initially burdensome to new recruits, became reassuring to veterans who knew that weight represented robust construction and reliable operation. The distinctive metallic ping of the ejecting clip signaled time to reload but also marked the end of another 8-round cycle that might have saved lives. Marines named their rifles, carved initials into stocks, treated the weapons with the respect due to tools that meant survival. This relationship between warrior and weapon, forged in combat where malfunction meant death, created bonds that lasted lifetimes. Veterans decades later could field strip an M1 Garand blindfolded, muscle memory preserved across years of civilian life, fingers remembering the precise pressure points and rotation angles required to disassemble the rifle they had carried across hostile beaches. The statistical evidence, compiled after the war from after-action reports and unit records, confirmed what Marines knew instinctively. Squads armed with M1 Garands demonstrated higher kill ratios, lower casualty rates, and greater tactical flexibility than comparable units armed with bolt-action rifles. American forces transitioned to M1 Garands faster in the Pacific than the European theater, recognizing the weapon's particular value in close-range jungle and island combat. By late 1943, Marine infantry in the Pacific carried M1 Garands as standard equipment, while some Army units in Europe still used M1903 Springfields for specialized purposes. This prioritization reflected hard lessons learned in early Pacific battles where bolt-action rifles proved inadequate against Japanese close assault tactics. The Marine Corps, never numbering more than several 100,000 troops compared to the multimillion-man army, could be re-equipped more quickly. Once equipped, Marines in the Pacific became evangelical about the M1 superiority, spreading its reputation through combat effectiveness rather than official propaganda. The weapon's psychological impact on both sides deserves examination because material advantages translate into mental advantages that affect combat performance in immeasurable ways. Marines who carried M1 Garands developed confidence that bordered on swagger, knowing their rifles outclassed anything the enemy carried. This confidence manifested in aggressive patrolling, willingness to engage superior numbers, and tactical boldness that kept Japanese forces constantly reacting rather than initiating. When a Marine squad encountered Japanese infantry, the Marines knew they could deliver overwhelming firepower instantly, without mechanical manipulation between shots, without the vulnerability that bolt-action riflemen experienced during their cycling pause. This knowledge bred tactical aggressiveness that Japanese commanders found difficult to counter. Conversely, Japanese infantry increasingly recognized their weapons' disadvantage as campaigns progressed and survivors shared experiences with replacement troops. Soldiers who witnessed their comrades cut down while working rifle bolts against Americans who fired continuously understood the disparity in visceral terms that no amount of training in warrior spirit could overcome. The psychological weight of knowing your enemy can shoot faster, hit harder, and maintain fire while advancing creates doubt that erodes morale regardless of ideological conditioning. Japanese officers noted in captured documents and post-war interviews that their soldiers showed increasing reluctance to conduct offensive operations against American rifle fire by 1944, a remarkable admission given the Japanese military's emphasis on offensive spirit and aggressive tactics. The M1 Garand had broken something fundamental in Japanese tactical confidence, not through a single dramatic defeat but through countless small encounters where superior American firepower made Japanese doctrine obsolete. The climax of this story contains no single dramatic moment. Instead, it unfolds across hundreds of small engagements where individual Marines with M1 Garands defeated Japanese soldiers with Arisaka rifles in firefights measured in seconds. On Guadalcanal, a Marine patrol encountered a Japanese position. With M1903 Springfields, that patrol might have fired a volley and sought cover while working bolts. With M1 Garands, they maintained continuous fire that suppressed the position and allowed maneuver. On Tarawa, a Marine crossing the seawall faced a Japanese bunker at 30 yards. With a bolt-action rifle, he might have fired once before enemy response. With an M1 Garand, he fired 8 rounds into the firing slit in 4 seconds, achieving suppression that saved his life and those of Marines advancing behind him. On Peleliu, a Marine clearing a cave encountered 3 Japanese defenders. With any bolt-action rifle, he might have killed one before the others responded. With his M1 Garand, he engaged all 3 in rapid succession before they could effectively return fire. These individual incidents, multiplied across 3 years and dozens of battles, created a cumulative advantage that shaped strategic outcomes. Specific battle examples illustrate these dynamics with brutal clarity. During the Battle of Cape Gloucester in December 1943, Marines of the 1st Division engaged Japanese defenders in dense jungle where visibility rarely exceeded 20 yards. In one documented firefight, a Marine rifle squad encountered a reinforced Japanese platoon advancing through jungle trails. The Japanese, carrying Type 38 Arisaka rifles and moving in column formation, expected to deploy into battle line and engage the Americans in sustained rifle fire. The Marines, armed with M1 Garands, opened fire immediately from concealment. In the first 10 seconds of contact, each Marine fired 4 to 6 rounds, delivering approximately 40 rounds into the Japanese formation before Japanese soldiers could effectively respond. Japanese troops attempting to work their bolt-action rifles while under continuous fire found the task nearly impossible. The human stress response degrades fine motor skills, making the precise movements required for rapid bolt manipulation extremely difficult under incoming fire. Marines, by contrast, simply pressed triggers repeatedly while maintaining sight picture. The engagement lasted approximately 2 minutes and resulted in over 30 Japanese casualties against 2 Marine wounded. This pattern repeated across the Pacific Theater wherever M1-equipped Marines encountered bolt-action-equipped Japanese infantry in close-range engagements. The firepower differential proved so decisive that Japanese tactical doctrine essentially collapsed in close combat situations. Another example from Peleliu in September 1944 involved a Marine fire team clearing caves in the M1 ridgeline. For Marines armed with M1 Garands approached a cave entrance from which Japanese defenders opened fire. The Marines returned fire immediately, each putting multiple rounds through the cave opening in seconds. The volume of fire suppressed the Japanese position long enough for the Marines to maneuver, throwing grenades into the cave entrance while maintaining rifle fire. Japanese defenders inside, armed with Arisaka bolt-action rifles in confined spaces, could not generate sufficient return fire to prevent the Marine assault. Within minutes, the cave was secured. Similar actions occurred thousands of times across Peleliu's nightmarish terrain, with M1-equipped Marines systematically clearing positions that might have been impregnable against bolt-action armed attackers. The turning point arrived not through any single battle but through the moment when Japanese commanders recognized their infantry could not overcome American firepower through spirit and bayonet charges. This realization came gradually, emerging from mounting casualties and consistent tactical defeats in situations where Japanese doctrine predicted success. Officers who had spent careers training in close assault tactics faced enemies who shot them down before they closed range. The cognitive dissonance must have been profound. Everything Japanese military culture taught about warfare emphasized offense, spirit, and the bayonet as the ultimate weapon. American M1 Garands demonstrated these teachings were obsolete. Japanese forces adapted where possible, emphasizing defensive tactics, prepared positions, and forcing Americans to attack through killing zones. But even these adjustments could not overcome the fundamental firepower disparity. Marines with M1 Garands could assault prepared positions with sustainable casualties because their rifles maintained suppressive fire while advancing, a capability bolt-action rifles could not match. The tables had turned completely. Attackers held firepower advantage. Defenders with bolt-action rifles could not generate sufficient volume of fire to stop determined assault by semi-automatic armed infantry. World War I doctrine, which held that defense dominated offense through machine guns and artillery, no longer applied when attacking infantry carried individual weapons approaching the sustained fire rate of light machine guns. The consequences rippled beyond tactical engagements to strategic planning. American commanders knew their Marine and Army infantry possessed firepower superiority at the individual level. This knowledge informed aggressive tactics and operational planning that accepted casualties in frontal assaults where European armies might have waited for flanking opportunities. Not that American forces were cavalier with lives, but commanders recognized that well-trained infantry with M1 Garands could achieve objectives faster and with lower overall casualties than protracted campaigns using bolt-action rifles. The confidence in infantry capability that the M1 Garand provided translated into operational tempo that kept Japanese forces off balance, never allowing time to fully prepare defenses before the next American assault. The island-hopping campaign, characterized by rapid seizure of strategic locations while bypassing heavily defended positions, relied on American ability to overcome prepared defenses through superior firepower and aggressive tactics enabled by weapons like the M1 Garand. Japanese military leadership, examining captured M1 Garands and interrogating prisoners about American tactics, understood they faced technological and doctrinal defeat. Some officers wrote reports recommending immediate development of semi-automatic rifles for Japanese forces. These recommendations went nowhere. Japan's industrial capacity, strained beyond limits supporting naval operations and aircraft production, could not support additional weapons development. Raw material shortages meant existing production often suffered quality declines as manufacturers substituted inferior metals and simplified manufacturing processes. Introducing complex new weapon systems was impossible. Japanese infantry would continue with Arisaka bolt-action rifles until war's end. The only variable would be declining quality as last-ditch manufacturing sacrificed finish and features to maintain basic functionality. Japanese soldiers in the war's final months often carried Arisaka rifles with roughly machined parts, unfinished wood stocks, and visible manufacturing defects. These rifles still functioned, but they represented the desperation of a nation whose industrial base was collapsing under American strategic bombing and naval blockade. The comparative analysis must acknowledge that Japanese tactical doctrine, while flawed when confronting semi-automatic rifles, achieved remarkable successes earlier in the war against opponents armed with bolt-action weapons. Japanese infantry had routed British, Dutch, and Chinese forces in the war's initial campaigns, demonstrating that their emphasis on night operations, infiltration tactics, and close assault could overcome better-equipped enemies when those enemies carried rifles requiring manual operation between shots. The problem for Japan was that American doctrine and equipment evolved faster than Japanese tactics could adapt. By late 1943, every Marine rifle squad included not just M1 Garands but also Browning automatic rifles providing true automatic fire, Thompson or Rising submachine guns for close quarters, and increasingly sophisticated supporting weapons like M1919 machine guns and M260mm mortars. This combined arms approach at the squad level, built around the foundation of M1 Garand-equipped riflemen, created infantry units capable of generating firepower that entire Japanese companies struggled to match. Japanese attempts to counter through increased emphasis on defensive positions, elaborate fortifications, and forcing Americans to attack through prepared kill zones achieved tactical successes on islands like Iwo Jima and Peleliu, where Marines suffered heavy casualties. But even these defensive masterpieces could not overcome the fundamental firepower disparity. Marines could assault fortified positions with sustainable losses because their rifles maintained suppressive fire during advances, keeping Japanese defenders pinned while assault elements closed range. Bolt-action defenders, unable to generate sufficient volume of fire to stop determined attackers armed with semi-automatic weapons, watched helplessly as American infantry tactics negated their positional advantages through superior firepower. For Marines, the contrast became increasingly stark. They received weapons that improved incrementally as manufacturing processes refined and minor design modifications incorporated lessons from field reports. The M1 Garand that a Marine carried on Okinawa in 1945 was functionally identical to the rifle carried on Guadalcanal in 1943, but detailed refinements improved reliability and reduced weight slightly. American industrial capacity maintained quality throughout the war while accelerating production, a feat unmatched by any other combatant nation. Marines came to take for granted that their rifles would function flawlessly, that ammunition would be available, and that armor support would quickly repair any issues. This logistical and industrial superiority translated into combat confidence that Japanese soldiers, fighting with declining equipment quality and chronic ammunition shortages, could not match. The material factors became psychological factors. Marines knew they held every advantage. Japanese infantry knew they faced enemies better equipped, better supplied, and carrying rifles that shot continuously while Japanese Arisakas required bolt manipulation between each shot. The mental impact of this knowledge affected combat performance in ways difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. The final irony lies in modern perception of these weapons. Military surplus markets and collectors prize Japanese Arisaka rifles for their craftsmanship and historical significance. Well-preserved examples, particularly early war production with intact imperial chrysanthemum stamps, command substantial prices. The M1 Garand likewise enjoys status as an iconic American rifle, sought by collectors and shooting enthusiasts. Both weapons receive respect as examples of their respective nations' firearms development. But this peaceful appreciation overlooks the brutal reality these rifles represented in combat. Japanese soldiers died by the thousands carrying Arisaka rifles that could not match the firepower of American M1 Garands. Marines survived by the thousands because their rifles shot faster than Japanese bolt-actions could cycle. The mechanical difference measured in fractions of seconds translated into life and death across thousands of individual encounters. The rifles themselves were simply tools, neither good nor evil. The outcomes they enabled and the deaths they caused belonged to the humans who wielded them and the nations that sent those humans into combat. The reflection on legacy must acknowledge what these weapons represented beyond their technical specifications. The M1 Garand symbolized American industrial capacity to develop, test, and mass-produce sophisticated weapons that incorporated the latest advances in firearms technology. The rifle demonstrated American military culture that valued individual soldier effectiveness and sought technological solutions to tactical problems. The M1 exemplified the belief that better equipment, properly employed, could reduce casualties and achieve victory faster. This philosophy guided American weapons development throughout the 20th century and continues today. The Arisaka rifle, particularly in Japanese hands, represented a different philosophy. It symbolized belief that spirit and discipline could overcome material disadvantage, that warrior culture and willingness to sacrifice could defeat industrial-age firepower. Japanese tactical doctrine, while not dismissing modern weapons entirely, subordinated technology to human factors like morale, courage, and offensive spirit. This philosophy had roots in Japanese history and cultural traditions that valued such qualities. But the Pacific War proved that philosophy wrong when confronted with opponents who combined equivalent courage and discipline with overwhelming material superiority. American Marines were no less brave than Japanese soldiers. They simply carried better weapons. The final accounting must consider both material and human dimensions of this story. Approximately 16 million M1 Garand rifles saw service with American forces throughout World War II and beyond, equipping not just Marines and Army infantry but also Allied forces through Lend-Lease programs. These rifles participated in every major American engagement from 1943 forward, functioning reliably in every climate and condition from Normandy's hedgerows to Okinawa's coral ridges. The weapon service record speaks to John Garand's engineering genius and American industrial capability to mass-produce sophisticated weapons to consistent standards. Japanese Arisaka rifles, produced in comparable numbers across all variants, served Japan's military forces with distinction within the limitations of bolt-action design, but they could not overcome doctrinal and mechanical obsolescence when confronting semi-automatic opponents. The human cost of this disparity remains impossible to calculate with precision, but combat loss ratios and casualty statistics suggest the M1 Garand saved American lives numbered in tens of thousands by ending firefights faster, with fewer American casualties, than bolt-action rifles could have achieved. Every Marine who returned home from the Pacific carried memories of his M1 Garand, the rifle that allowed him to fight effectively against fanatical enemies in close terrain where seconds meant survival. These veterans spoke of their rifles with reverence reserved for sacred objects because the M1 had literally saved their lives in combat. The weapon became inseparable from the Marine identity, a symbol of American technological prowess and the industrial might that ultimately defeated Axis powers. Modern Marines, armed with M16s and M4 carbines that trace lineage through the M14 to the original M1 Garand, carry forward this tradition of individual firepower superiority that Garand's innovation established. What remains, more than 7 decades after these rifles last fired in anger, is recognition that technological advantage in warfare produces effects beyond simple mechanical capability. The M1 Garand semi-automatic operation provided American infantry with firepower that enabled aggressive tactics, reduced casualties in comparison to bolt-action equipped forces, and created psychological advantages that compounded material benefits. Japanese Arisaka rifles, regardless of their quality or the skill of soldiers who carried them, could not overcome this fundamental gap. The preference American Marines expressed for M1 Garands over captured Arisaka rifles was never truly about preference. It was about survival. When combat reduces to individual firefights at ranges measured in yards, the soldier whose rifle fires 8 times while the enemy works his bolt twice will likely survive. That Marine returns home. That Japanese soldier dies on a Pacific island. The tragedy lies not in the weapons but in the war that required their use. The history lies in recognizing that material factors, while not solely determinative, create advantages that bravery alone cannot overcome. The lesson lies in understanding that technological development, industrial capacity, and tactical adaptation matter enormously in modern warfare. If this story gave you a new way to see the Pacific War, like, share, and subscribe, and tell us which moment surprised you most. We'll return next week with another chapter in the war that changed the world.